Now we are on. Okay. You can also hear me. So warmly welcome to the Museum of Finnish Architecture. I'm Arja-Liisa Kaasinen. I work here as the head of collaboration and engagement. And I'm really happy to see these many people in this kind of dark evening, autumn evening here. So these Woodworks events are collaboration between Aalto University, the Ministry of Environment, and the Museum of Finnish Architecture. We are really happy to have these kind of collaborations in Finland, and thank you specifically to you, Petri Heino from the Ministry of Environment, and also Pekka Heikkinen from Aalto University. And Petri and Pekka will be here afterwards if you want to ask more about this woodwork program. This is the last evening lecture, so if you have some questions of the other ones, so guys will be here also afterwards. So we are live streaming this evening as well, so if you want to ask links to the previous ones, or if you want to see this again and again tomorrow or this evening, so you will find the links in our Facebook events. So this museum is the second oldest architect museum in the world, but we are still interested in what's happening today and what's happening in the future. And today's topic is wood and impact. What is the role of wood in sustainable development? And today's speakers, we have here Anders Adlercreutz, who is a member of parliament, architect, and also partner of architect office A-Consultit. And Pekka Pakkanen, who is also architect, but he has focused on these recent times on promoting practical solutions to the grand challenges our planet is facing now and in the future. So we are going to have an interesting evening. And after your speeches, we will have time for questions as well. But now, welcome, Pekka, and you will tell a little bit more about the program. Have a nice evening.
Thanks. Good to see some familiar faces from earlier sessions, but even better to have some new people as well. Anyway, shortly, I asked Pekka and Anders to join this session because both of them have surprised me, and I guess a few more people as well, having a very prominent career as architect on a traditional sense, and then all of a sudden doing totally something else. We'll see what the presentations will be. At least Pekka has copied exactly my title, because I couldn't decide whether it's architect and impact or architect and impact, so we'll see. And as well, Anders' presentation will be a mystery, but we'll see, and hopefully, or not, they will be good ones. So, Pekka, please.
Thank you, Pekka. Thank you, Arja-Liisa, and thanks for the possibility to be here. Pekka Heikkinen asked this to be a personal point of view for architecture, for timber architecture, for explaining what on earth are we doing and why. So let's get to that. And as this has to be personal, I start from the beginning. I was born in Kouvola, and to end up being an architect focused on timber, that's sort of a natural starting point. There was nothing of this world around me. It was a really nice small town, but sort of the starting point was quite different. For some reason, I always wanted to be an architect, and once I finally got to the studies, I was super excited about everything. I went all in. I was doing all the competitions, and by doing so many competitions, you always, in the end, you end up winning some. On the left side, there's a student competition in Sydney, and the point of that was a bit environmental. It was a glass box, a visitor center, and then there was a floating roof protecting from the sunlight, and the for this I found out that there's a material called beryllium. There's steel, that's a metal that's lighter than air. And once you fill this structure with helium, then it really floats. And after the prize, I heard that this beryllium is radioactive, so it's really nice that it was never built. But on the right side, there's my diploma work. This is the Expo Pavilion for Hanover in '98. And before this, I was somehow in this small local scale, I felt like I was somehow successful, and like everything that I did there was a good chance of getting somewhere. And in this competition, I was in the lowest category in the exhibition halls, in the very last room. And the reason, like half of the reason, was that on the way, I got so excited I forgot the whole program and sort of started thinking of how should architecture be built. And in this pavilion, the pavilion was actually a secondary thing. It was more about the forest and the natural ventilation and gathering the rainwater and having everything built of circulating materials. And at that time, I thought that in a couple of years, everything would be built out of circulating materials because the material has some value. It's sort of, all the materials are sort of built once and then they should be reused and reused and reused. And I'm sort of happy to hear that this thinking is picking up nowadays, and now we're really working on this theme to have something built in this ideology. This path of sort of conventional architecture led me to work at Peter Zumthor's office in early 2000 in Haldenstein, and this was somewhat of a peak of an architect's career, that you work for an international master and then you really push yourself and go as deep in architecture as you can. Of course, the thing that so far I carried this idea that architecture is the greatest value on the planet. Like if you do real architecture, there's nothing, like you can put anything, you can pay anything for it, and it's all right, because that's nothing can be better. But this year made me think that there should be something else, because part of the clients went bankrupt and they sort of lost everything waiting for a project to appear, and then behind these extremely beautiful details and amazing buildings, there was no other values that personally I was after. So after this year, I returned home, and I was sort of lost. Like, if this is not the path to go, then what would the path be? And then, as a secondary story, all my life I've been a ski mountaineer, and I've spent numerous trips, 30 years in the Alps in different mountain regions. There's a glacier in Chamonix, it's called Mer de Glace. On the left side you see an image 100 years ago. On the right side there's an image from 2017. And in the last 30 years I've visited this area and unluckily lost some friends on this glacier. I've witnessed on my eyes that this is the climate change. It's not some thing. It's really happening. It's one of the greatest challenges of our generation, and we have a responsibility to do something about it. Of course, as an architect, it's easy to think that I have this little gap in this field of possibilities, what I can do. So I ended up starting an office with two classmates from TKK, or nowadays Aalto University, and we did invited competitions. We won some. We did some sort of decent architecture, and on the top left there's Alla Sipula was the chief designer of that, and there was great expectations for that, and it seems like people have really taken that as sort of as a nice recreation, but architecturally that never reached the level that we were after, and there was a great disappointment in that sense. On the right side there's the Serlachius Museum of Mäntä. This was the biggest architectural competition at that time, was held in 2014, and we teamed with the winners from Mexico and Slovenia, and I worked as a chief designer for this project, and that lasted for 3 years, and that was one of the most amazing experiences, because the client really wanted to have good quality, and it was sort of really stressful and hard work, but then in the end it paid off. On the bottom left there's Guggenheim Helsinki. We teamed with Murao Kusunoki Architects managed to win that competition, and then we were sort of prepared for building the museum and really excited about that. But then for political reasons it was never built. After all of that, I sort of the excitement and the zeal and the sort of the burn for architecture, it sort of faded little by little. Just sort of suddenly I realized that there's no values behind all of these that make me tick, and I was doing it for the reason of having this office and sort of for the wrong reasons. Then we had a discussion with my business partners, and we figured out that my place is not in the office, and I left. I absolutely had no plan what to do. I was just sort of, that was that. It was it's strange. Like you're almost 50, and then you have no idea why. And then that's, of course, I was lucky in that sense that there was a reason to find out that what is the mission. Right? And as often in life, the mission found me, not the other way around. In that image, there's Tuija, my wife, Tarmo, our 1-year-old son, Mauri on the right. Mauri is here also. And there's Lauri Reuter, who is one of the leading food scientists in Finland, good friend of Tuija's from the Singularity University. Tuija handed in. She was taking part in all sorts of science competitions. So she handed in an entry for a competition in Los Angeles called X Prize Visioneering. And this competition is about how to tackle the greatest challenges on this planet. And our category was how to feed the next billion people, because in 12 years there will be 1 billion people more. And our competition was about finding the rules for the future science competition. So they really wanted somebody outside the box to think about what should be the thing to solve. And Tuija had found out this on the bottom left. There's an aeroponic potato farm. And that technique comes from the 60s, from the space age. You can grow potatoes 10 times faster than the conventional way. You can recycle the nutrition and the water, and the thing is that it's a bit expensive at the moment. So if there was a way to make that dramatically cheaper, that would be one way to provide food. And the green image is a bioreactor. Mr. Lauri has that in his refrigerator. He's building food out of almost nothing in this refrigerator. That's barely eatable, but still it's food. And then what happened was that Tuija got invited to Los Angeles. I went along as a nanny for Mr. Tarmo, and then in 1 week we realized that we were working on this like full time, and sort of I got really excited of something that I absolutely had no idea of. So we studied everything that we could find out of these food producing techniques, and that was the only thing we were fighting over, that who has to take care of the baby and who is the one that is allowed to work. But then Tarmo learned to crawl in an airplane above Atlantic, and he was sort of the science community took care of him most of the time. So we gathered this team of scientists, food scientists, both from Finland and from California. And there was a huge group of people involved, and then we found on the top left there's one of the images from the early stages of this X Prize. This selection criteria, whatever events where people were like this. There was in the beginning there was hundreds of teams, and in the end there was 2 teams for each of these 5 categories. And in bottom left there's Tony Robbins, that was the sponsor of us, and I was sort of wondering that who is this guy, because everybody was sort of going around him like he's some semi-god. And then we found out that he's the first successful personal trainer in the US, and he has his own Netflix series and books and whatever. He's like multi-millionaire. And then on the left there's our good friend Pharrell Williams. He's a musician, and he's really excited about design and architecture. We had lots of discussions with him. He's coming up with his own architectural line of having affordable housing for people that cannot afford these multi-million luxury houses that the US usually provides on solar energy and the rainwater and so on. But then the basic concept was all about these modular timber boxes. We won this competition, and then at the moment we're working with Neste to build the first of these stations in Tuusula for the housing fair that will be opened in 2020. And that will be a very simple version, but still modular. It's sort of in this path of thinking. For the next project, we heard that there's this company called Solar Foods that is building. They're making protein out of thin air. They capture CO2 from the air, and then they cook it with bacteria, and they end up with protein that's edible. And so I called this guy, this Pasi Vainikka, and told him that I'm the best architect for them, that like, you should hire us immediately. And he was like, well, let's go and have lunch. And then we built them a concept for a chain of factories, this global chain of factories. I have the image under this image, but I'm not allowed to show that because that's presented in Slush the first time in Tomorrow. So sorry for that, but that was one amazing project because they wanted the architecture to show the same values that they have in their food and in this process of food. And this like, is not really about the architecture, it's more about their innovations. And they have this really amazing technique that could solve the issues that we were originally thinking in California. Another competition we're working on is for the Lapilahti Hospital. The city of Helsinki is selling this hospital area and there's a competition of what would be the solution, what are the future services, and if there's some additional buildings, then how and where should they be built. So Livadi, probably the best office for renovating buildings, is doing the renovation of the existing buildings, and we are designing this new part that is on the edge or on the side of the area. And our idea is that they will build the Länsibana, this bicycle route from the center to Espoo. And if you want to build something in this area, you should build above that. So we have built this timber frame that is including some housing, some supported housing, a park inside the structure, a multi-purpose arena, food production, a huge solar plant that is as a continuation of the construction in the side of Länsiväylä. And all of this goes together sort of in this one structure that is flexible and works as a noise barrier for this area. We made some noise studies and figured out that after having this built, that it will be absolutely quiet. You don't hear anything from Länsiväylä in this area anymore. This competition is in the second phase. It's sort of mix between an open and a closed one. So they published all these works. Actually, they published just a couple of these images. So this is the one that I can show. The last project that we're working on at the moment is a circular economy block in Jätkäsaari. This is a firm called CO10 by Kimmo Rönkä and Pete Halsall. And they want to build a complete co-living block in Jätkäsaari, and they want to build that as much as possible out of recycled materials. So at the moment we are studying of what are the realistic possibilities, which materials can be recirculated, how do you find that, what is the logics of all of this, how could you recycle timber pieces, because that's sort of, I find it really intriguing that timber is easily seen as something cheap and something that you use only once, and if you sort of see it valuable enough to be recycled, then that's a path to a completely new world. And I also, like, in this way of thinking, what is the role of the architects in the future society? The more we move in the path of circular economy, the more there will be tasks for architects, because who else could solve these complicated issues of finding some random materials and cooking it up to be something really interesting architecturally, but also functionally. So this is the challenge we're starting all right now, actually. and we have no idea where this will lead, but we find it sort of exciting enough to feel the reason of why we're doing whatever we're doing. As a last image, there's some projects from around the world. On the left top, there's a project for a center of Oslo by Ralph Ramstad Architects. On the right, there's a project that should be built by 2040 in Oslo, in Tokyo. And then there's this Chris Penrecht, he's an Austrian architect, and he has built this concept on the bottom left, where you mix housing, the systematic, like one family looking like projects, stacking them on top of each other and having food production like between these housing projects, and all of these I see as the way onward. This is the future world where places are built of wood, where the nature is brought back to the cities, and part of the nature is not just only for looking, it's also for eating and for having this new way of urban agriculture. Thank you.
Let's save the questions at the end and continue with something else with Anders, please.
No, yes. Hello, my name is Anders Adlercreutz, architect, member of parliament, politician, which might be a strange combination, even though it was maybe more of a surprise for my surroundings than for myself when I did that move. Let's see, does this? When I was a kid, I was very interested in society in general. I was a very worried teenager in the 80s, worried about nuclear armament and things like that. And I attended these peace marches in Helsinki. But as many teenagers, I was quite a shy boy, and I thought that, okay, maybe politics isn't for me. And in the 80s, politics wasn't cool by any way. So I thought that, okay, maybe I channel maybe this interest through other means and started studying architecture, which of course wasn't something that came out of the thin air. I'm a son of two architects, so one would say that it was in that sense quite an easy choice. But is architecture that different from politics? I think there are many things that are interconnected. When you're an architect, you need to be interested in society, you need to understand how society works. You need to have certain communicational skills, and maybe most of all, you need to be able to draw a synthesis from many different and often contradictional sets of facts or requirements So that's what an architect does. Lots of requirements, and then you somehow try to find the essence, the idea of how these could be combined into something that's good and useful. And in many ways, that's something that a politician also does. You have lots of requirements from different stakeholders, and then you have to somehow make the most of those, something that, as well as possible, fulfills the requirements. Many say that, isn't it frustrating to be a politician because everything is so slow? But then again, when your arguments are really slow, I mean, a project can easily take 10 years, you spend until you realize that this isn't worth continuing either. And then finally, when you do enough work, and it's always a question of, I feel it's a question of doing enough work, maybe not having this divine inspiration, but really working, then finally you reach the solution that's good. But when you're a politician, when you get an idea, you throw it out to the world, and then you're stuck with it, and then you can never walk back. So this is maybe a lesson that architects could take that politicians could take from architects.
Are you talking about yourself or?
No, of course. I think that maybe I might fulfill some of those ideas as a politician. I hope so, but in general. So I'm here in two roles, as an architect and as a politician. And I'll tell you something about maybe my relationship with building, my relationship with wood, how you can save the world by building in wood, and then maybe what I should have on my to-do list while working as a politician. To build a house is not a minor matter in Finland. It's about making your mark on the land, about making a place. It's a heroic endeavor in many ways. Building is a major theme in folklore all around the world, and maybe more than in many places in Finland. As long as you build in wood, which of course in Finland also is the only right way. Ideally, you cut down the trunks yourself, trunks that you have carefully selected in the forest one summer day during long contemplative walks. You pull them out of the forest, preferably with a horse, and do a proper log house. So that's the idea. Of course, the reality today is slightly different, but the story is the same. As an architect, I want to use a material that I understand, whose story I understand, whose workings I understand. And wood is simple. It's quite easy to understand. It's easy to understand how it sticks together, how it bears its load. And you can give it many characteristics. You can treat it in many different ways. And you can work it yourself, maybe most of all. And that's one thing that I feel is very important. Of course, I mean, concrete is fantastic. It's a wonderful material. It's a mystical material in many ways. 1 second, it's goo, this soap, and then it somehow suddenly turns into shiny stone. It's inexplicable in many ways. But wood is different. You can see the process. It's easy to read the way it was constructed. This is not really our work, or it was a work that we did together with Gert Wienkorv, but he's the original artist. The logic of a wooden building is always visible. You can see time on the wooden surface. You can see the weather it is today, something that happened 5 years ago, or maybe 20 years ago. History leaves its mark on a wooden building, but in a good way. And a wooden building can have a previous life, and it can have a life after this. You can use it, you can reuse it, you can use it for different purposes in different scales. One day it's a building, the next day maybe a piece of furniture, until it some days maybe ends up warming your house. And the best of all, you can build it yourself. Light pieces of building material, anybody can stick them together. That's me on the right before turning grey. You can do it with simple tools, and you can live there happily in your own wooden building. Because who wouldn't be happy in a wooden house? But of course, we do not only build for ourselves, for selfish reasons. When you build something, you have an impact. You have an impact on the site. You might have an impact on society. You might even have an impact on the world. Because by building, we can save the world. In the big scheme of things, I mean, the biggest thing we are facing is climate change. A few years ago, the Paris Agreement said that we, humankind, should be carbon neutral. Actually, we should cut down our emissions by 80% by 2050. Then we said, okay, we should be carbon neutral by 2050. A few years ago, Finland said that Finland should be carbon neutral by 2045. And today, 2035 is the aim we have here nationally. And building can have a great positive or negative impact on these goals. Because around 50% of the natural raw materials we dig out of the earth or cut down or process somehow goes to our buildings. Around 50% of our waste here in Europe is caused by our houses, by our buildings. Around 40% of our emissions come from our buildings, the building processes. Around 10% of our global emissions come from the making of concrete or steel. So that in itself is a huge thing. And in this comparison, the forest wood shines. And why is that? 1 kilo of dry wood has stored almost 2 kilos of carbon dioxide in its lifetime, which means that one small single-family house built in wood is carbon storage for around 30 tons of carbon dioxide. How much is that? That's for 10 years of driving in an ordinary family. That amount of carbon is stored in a building. How come? Here you see a comparison between different wall structures. A wooden wall is carbon negative, whereas a concrete sandwich wall is a great cause for carbon emissions. And when you compare a traditional concrete building with a traditional wooden building, the difference in carbon dioxide, in carbon footprint, is equally big. So by building in wood, you might be able to save the world. Then again, do we have wood? Do we have enough wood to build? In 24 hours, the Finnish forest grows as much as we in Finland use for building in wood during the whole year. In 29 seconds, the forest grows as much as we need to build a 6-story wooden apartment house in Finland. In 10 hours, the forest grows as much as would be needed if we'd replace all our housing, all our concrete housing, all our housing projects with wooden housing projects. So in the big scheme of things, it's not about big amounts of wood, but it's about a big possibility to cut down our emissions and to build more smartly. So what's stopping us then? And now we come to the part where I really should do some work in Parliament, and maybe Petri too at the Ministry. This is how we build today in Finland. The concrete industry was very smart in the 60s. They came up with a system of load-bearing sandwich walls and these ontelolatat, whatever you call it in English, these concrete slabs. And everybody started making those products. Concrete walls, concrete slabs, which means that today, if you want to build a house, an apartment house, if you want to get lots of offers, you build it in concrete because you can get offers from many and then you can choose the cheapest one. Building, knowing that this is probably a pretty cost-efficient project. When you build in wood, it's different. It's often a project. You often have to design all the details from scratch. You often have to start working with the provider at an early stage, which means that you really can't choose between 1, 2, 3, or even 6 providers. We report that every house that shouldn't be possible at all. According to the energy report, modern houses are vastly better than old houses, but in fact, like in practice, the story is different. Which means that we have started building houses that don't age well, that are hard to repair, that are practically impossible to recycle without really gaining much. So instead of measuring the theoretical energy efficiency during a short period of time, during the lifespan of these quite disposable buildings, we should look at how the material is produced, if it releases carbon when it's produced, or maybe sequesters carbon, how much energy it needs when it's processed, how well it ages inside the building, what the longevity of that building is, and how easily that building can be recycled afterwards. If we do that, if we measure that, then we build sustainably, then we could reach our climate goals, and I believe we would also, in that case, build more in wood. And that means that we are not only talking about nice houses, wooden joints, nice architecture, we are also talking about saving the world when we talk about building in wood. Thank you.
Thank you. And now it's time for your questions. And hopefully you will start so that I don't need to do that. By the way, do we need the microphone in here? Yeah, okay. So, I will ask first from Petri Heino from Ministry of Environment, how close we are to the aims that Anders set, like the make legislation for more easy for the, or actually you both should know it, and then have more producers to offer their services, and of course the education, which I should know something about. But Petri, maybe you will start.
Okay. You had many questions in there. I think we are progressing quite strongly in the wood building sector, but I think the whole building industry is like when you have learned a bad habit, it's really hard to get rid of this bad habit, and then you try to make kind of slight corrections, but I think we should do more radical changes now, and maybe, and I don't see that that's possible. So of course these tiny changes are also positive and nice, and especially I'm in charge of the wood building program. Together with the members of parliament, we try to
discuss about, is it market pull or market push, since like Google wanted to build a wooden house. Supercell would like to be in a wooden house, and how important is that in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, if for some companies it will become a way of building their brand. They are. Google would be in a wooden building because it views it as there's an environmental image around that. Of course, then we should be. Should be. I mean, we shouldn't do greenwashing, and there's a risk for that, of course, also. But I think, I mean, people will start to evaluate things differently and value environmental friendliness, carbon neutrality, and then they, of course, also will want to broadcast this to the public.
I think that we're in this point where the values are there, and the shift or the change to timber being sort of a massive way of construction. So like the big volume of buildings will be built of wood. I think that is really close. It's just a couple of things has to change. One of them would be in the legislation, so that you could show timber surfaces. Then people know that this is a timber building. That's a big issue in all of this.
Most of you came here, I guess, to hear about wood and can agree with all these aims, but can we as well spoil the whole thing? Because there's quite a big possibility to change construction sector at the moment.
Yes, I mean, we have to be. The building, I mean, the brand of building in wood needs to be good. It needs to be attractive. So whatever we build, we have to build well. I mean, just a few catastrophes, and then everybody in Finland might think that it's unsafe. That something else is much better. So, for example, I mean, the talk around the wood project in Jätkäsaari. I mean, the issue in itself was, I mean, the cause was quite evident. You shouldn't use birch veneer whenever there's a risk of humidity coming into it because there's so much sugar in it. But and there wasn't really any health issue, but it was blown up really in the general public, and that, I mean, many cases like that might be bad. Then, of course, on the legislation side, you should know what you're doing. When I came to Parliament in Finland, we were implementing this low energy, zero energy housing thing from the EU, and the first versions of that law that went out for comments were so strict that at the same time, while our Prime Minister Sipilä was praising a new wooden school in Pudasjärvi, saying this is what we really should do, his government was pushing through legislation that would have made that the last wooden school that would ever be able to be built in Finland, because the requirements were written in a way that would have made massive wooden houses, massive wooden public houses, schools and daycare centers impossible in Finland. Of course, I mean, a lot of people started talking about it, and including me, I had several meetings with the Minister of Environment, and then I mean, then at some point they realized this isn't good. They pulled back the proposal and revised the levels that were required, and now we can still build schools and daycare centers in massive wood. But I mean, we have to be careful with those things.
Simultaneously, if we manage to build them technically right, so we don't get in these issues, then what's the worst thing that can happen? If you look at this Ontelahti sandwich panel construction, that's sort of the way of nature, the only possibility at the moment, then how could you do worse with wood?
You don't maybe need to answer that. Okay, any more there at the end?
Yes, thank you for your presentations. I have a question about the forest, actually, because you gave this really motivating images that they created this inspiring idea that there's just wood for apartments and schools and everything's just growing all the time. We just have to go and take it. But when I'm in Finland and I look out of the car, out of the train, it seems like every tree is younger than 100 years. Or when I go and I buy wood, it's like fast grown with 10 rings in one piece of wood or so. So I'm thinking how to somehow reconcile this desire to make things from wood with the fact that the forest has sort of limited output, or also, let's say that using the forest also has impact on biodiversity or this kind of thing. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And in Finland, there is a big discussion around the forest, and of course, because taking our climate goals into consideration, we can't use we can't increase the use of forests really in Finland at the moment, because that would throw everything overboard. But the percentage that we use for wooden building is quite little. But yes, I mean here in southern Finland we have really few old forests. In the north slightly more, but in Finland generally the idea has been to grow the forest. I mean, for the last 50 years, to grow the forest as you grow a field. You plant the things, and then they grow and grow, and you harvest a little bit so that they get space to live. And then when they're 50, 60 years old, or even 40, you cut everything down, and then you plant anew. And in the forestry vocabulary, this is called like perinteinen kasvatus, like traditional growing, because that has been the tradition in Finland for 100 years. And the tradition before that, like jatkuva kasvatus, continuous growth, that is like a new revolutionary thing when you only like pick the big ones and let the other ones grow. But this might be now a long monologue here, but Luke, which is this research center, governmental research center, which surveys the carbon sinks in Finland, they have now revised their calculations quite a lot. But in the last ones, they said something to the extent that as far as the carbon sinks go, if you just cut selectively, it would be beneficial for growing the carbon sinks. And it would also be good for building in wood, because then you might get older trunks with more core wood in the middle, slower growth maybe. When I started as an architect in what we call the Rakennusselitys building directive, this document that you attach to every project, there was this sentence that just copied from one project to the other, that when the windows should be built using wood that has, was it 12 to 13 year rings per centimeter. And that's like impossible to get nowadays. It was probably impossible to get even then, but maybe I never then checked really. But I mean today, I mean if you're unlucky, you have 1 ring per centimeter, which means that Finnish window manufacturers to some extent have to get their wood from Germany nowadays, because they can't get good wood in Finland. What was it called? Profin, yeah, there was an article in Helsingin Sanomat where Profin said this a year or two ago. When I was building our summer cottage, you saw a few pictures of it some 10 years ago, I wanted to get good birch veneer, like without these butterfly things. And I had to call through all of Finland. I called to like the company that makes them, and to their like head of heads. And then he said, oh, actually in Oulu there might be 8 panels which are quite good. And that's like the situation in Finland that used to be the country of plywood. And then you can't get like good plywood anymore because we just produce like bulk stuff. And of course, if we want to build in wood, we want good building material.
By the way, this is not the answer, but I visited with the students today one mill, and they have amazing technology to sort timber. For example, they were sorting in 10 classes, and actually the techniques to do that is so good nowadays that if you really want to have a good timber, you can have I as well have noticed that you maybe have to do quite many calls to make that happen. And of course, in every part, not very good timber is not needed. So we have to use the 10% of the timber is good quality, 90% is not that good, I mean perfect quality. So So you have to be careful with that 10%.
Can I continue the question?
Yep.
Because I was very interested, and I'm still thinking that we went straight back to talking about timber, but not about forests.
Okay.
So how can we make better quality forests or better, more biodiversity, nicer, bigger trees?
Yeah, I mean, we have to have a forest that has woods of different ages and that has lots of old woods, and we should we should let some old woods fall over and die and just lie there, so that they then give possibilities for this small stuff to live there. We shouldn't have only fir woods or only pine woods, but let the diversity be there and not cut them out. And then it should grow to be older than it does today. There's been some research done around that, and it would cut the yield of the forest initially, but later on it would increase the income of the forestry owners, because they can get more from those older trunks, like higher prices.
Couple of additional comments on this forest and wood discussion. In Finland we have more protected forests in hectares than the rest of the Europe altogether. So I think we have done in that sense quite a good job. Since the last 50 years, the double of wood in the forests has doubled. No, the amount of wood in the forest has doubled. So of course the situation was much worse then. Now it's much better, and looking at the biodiversity issues, the things in the forest are not going worse, they are actually improving. And then, because of the forests have grown always more, it has been so that the Finnish forests have been the sink of our fossil emissions. Half of our Finnish whole fossil emissions have been captured by the forests. It has been the storage for the concrete industry emitting fossils. And I think this is what we should always keep in mind strongly, that this is what we should cut down, is the fossil emissions, and now. And then, of course, it's important to talk about forests. I don't say that, but yeah.
There was another question. Or comment.
Is this thing on? Yeah. My name is Gunnel Adlercreutz. I'm also originally an architect. I wanted to come back to this thing about the quality of the wood that you use in construction. And one of the problems, of course, has been that fertilized wood works very well for the paper industry. And Finland was a paper industry country. Cellulose is produced in between the rings. But for construction, you can't use that sort of wood, and we need to diversify our use of the forest, so that at the moment that trees are taken out, they are sorted into trees for construction and trees for bulk use. And then, of course, also comes in the aspect that we tend to do things in bulk instead of doing it with quality. We do quantity instead of quality. Quality should always be worth more than quantity. So it goes the whole way down in the chain, and it takes a long time to get back to where we should be.
By the way, the idea that if you just leave the forest grow like that, I don't believe on that. We start our education in visiting the forest school for, let's say, past 20 years, and it's quite clear that you have to create good growing conditions for timber. It just don't happen like that, and I believe quite much on like Finnish wood quality. Quite many colleagues say that we have a turbo-grown wood, which, in my opinion, is not true. We don't fertilize forests, but only little nowadays. Petri knows quite exact figures. Was it something like maximum 10% or whatever, but not too much. And also I got interested about that idea of the turbo grown forest and asked or interviewed quite many people from the forest sector, I mean universities and such, that they said that maybe the quality of timber has gone a little bit down, but on the other hand, the techniques that we can kind of sort the quality is so much better nowadays. So I don't believe that talk that we grow poor forest. I think we have very good and very strong timber in the forest. Not maybe perfect, not less, because that's a kind of dream.
Architect's dream.
My colleague from Austria said that if on one panel there's 3 knots per meter, he will throw it away because there has to be 8 knots. So it depends on the character. Anyway, I wasn't supposed to give the lecture. So more, but you're right that the pulp paper is very strong part of industry, and still, like in our visit to Metsä Wood, I noticed that something like 11% of their products go to mechanical industry, or the others went to pulp paper. Okay, more questions. And you of course know that the shipping things all over is growing, so making cardboard is a very good business, unfortunately, nowadays.
Thank you. More on a personal level, from architect to researcher or an architect to politician, why did you do this switch? Was it because you thought there was something you could create a bigger impact, or it was just a bit more interesting in that sense?
I think that you can do many things in life, and you should try new paths so that you then not on your deathbed don't say that, oh, I should have done that. And it wasn't really a plan, but it was a thing, like an idea I had in the back of my head for some time. And then in 2012, when I took the train to Helsinki, a friend of mine said that, okay, hey, actually, I mean, we need candidates for the local elections. And then I said, okay, maybe I should try that. I mean, now that our rush hour years are behind us, we have like 5 kids, and the youngest one was 3 at that time. So somebody might have said that we were in the middle of them, but somehow it felt like life was getting easier. So maybe I should try this. And then I entered the election. It was like one month before the election, and I didn't realize that at that point. So they were just closing the books, and I was like their last-minute candidate. Can't somebody come up with somebody? And then those elections went really well, and I was elected to the city council, and then I thought that was really interesting and inspiring in many ways. And then I said that, okay, so I mean, maybe I'll give it a shot and then run for parliament. And of course, nobody thought that I would enter at that point. But then, to everybody's surprise, I did quite well and entered. And then just without maybe not planning it very much, suddenly I was doing totally different things. And I don't really compare them. So which is better? I think they're different. I think as an architect, I can make an impact in different things, maybe a bigger impact, but at least a different one. And I think that I'll do this for a while, and then maybe I'll be kicked out after the next elections, and then maybe I do architecture again, or then something else altogether. So I don't really compare them. It's more of maybe this thought that I mean, life is maybe so short that you should try different venues.
I think that whatever you do, you should be driven. It's not. It doesn't go so that you calculate that what is the biggest impact. For me, I was the previous interest sort of faded out, and then I had to find something new. And now, at the moment, I feel like I'd like to go to work right away because I'm so excited, so driven about this. That's a thing. Just once we start getting a little bit older, we realize there's limited time left, so we really have to be selective of where we put our time and energy. And it's also about that.
I think we actually should be grateful that there are architects who want to go into politics too. We have in Kirkkonummi, for instance, better schools now, thanks to we have architects in the politics there. The renovation you had in Kirkkonummi, I know that you have had an impact on, and also legislation has been quite a lot better in Finland thanks to architects in the parliament knowing the things well enough to know what to get into the legislation. So it's really important that we have political activity from architects also.
I guess we, by the way, started this lecture series with kind of noticed that with cooperation with Museum of Architecture, Aalto University and Ministry of Environment, we can do something. And of course, you cooperate always. How many friends you have out of those 200 members of parliament that share your ideas and help you with that? Because that is, of course, important in life.
Yes, of course. I mean, yeah, you have to have. You have to somehow get people to think like you. And of course, I'm slightly wander off the subject maybe, but when I came to Parliament, as I didn't have really any political experience, my image of Parliament was, I mean, a bunch of arguing people and maybe like conflicting ideas. And then when I came there, I saw that, of course, I mean, there are conflicting ideas, but people are generally friends and actually really good friends. So it's quite a collegial working environment, like fantastic personnel, and most of the parliamentarians are nice, and many of them I consider very good friends. So. And then of course, I mean, then you form. I mean, you form these small groups that start to like work on the same things, like cross-party lines, and you gather around certain themes and form these like unofficial like clubs inside Parliament. So so I think. You need to network and connect yourself, and then at some point you realize that something that you started talking about 2 years ago, then you realize that those from the other party are also talking, and then things somehow, maybe after the next elections, a few sentences are written down in the program of the government, and then things go forward like that.
By the way, you shouldn't be worried because lifetime expectancy of Finnish men are quite high nowadays, so don't worry, you still have plenty of time. Okay, are we good with that? One more there.
Yeah, hi. I don't know if this is completely irrelevant, but like if we cut down our CO2 emissions really drastically, what effect does that have to the growth of speed of trees? Yeah, it's kind of like they need CO2 to grow, so yeah.
Yeah, as Petri said, at the moment, I mean, our emissions are like 57 million tons a year, and our forest sequester slightly above 20. So, I mean, when we are carbon neutral, then they sequester everything. But then of course we'll be negative. Maybe they would like maybe some slightly more. I don't know what the forest would like at that point. But yes, I mean I don't think that would be an issue. And of course we should strive to emit only so much that they need to grow. But of course, I mean, one of the reasons that the forests grow more now is that the climate is warmer, and there is more more stuff in the atmosphere that they like in 15 years, 20 years, something like that. The climate here will be like the climate of northern Germany, and that would probably increase the growth more, but also lead to the maybe some more unpleasant animals living there in the forest that then of course might be detrimental to their growth and their health. So climate can impact in many ways.
Okay. I think we can close here. Thank you for joining the session. I think by the way, didn't ask this guy in here to tell us that being an architect, but more like that there's millions of ways of being an architect, which I can see very well in the university. And people are looking for their way, like Pekka said, that you have to find your own purpose, or you may find your purpose. And I think life is very long, and you can do different careers and have an impact. Yes. So, thank you, Pekka, thank you, Andres, for excellent talk.